The ANC Electoral Committee, led by veteran Kgalema Motlanthe, this week presented a hard-hitting report to the National Executive Council, NEC, identifying divisions among the CR17 and Radical Economic Transformation, RET, groupings, regional secretaries who had gone rogue, and gangsters who had taken over the ANC in areas such as Tshwane. The committee has been doing preparatory work for the local elections and has helped with the candidate selection process, dispute resolutions, and removing obstacles in ensuring that the party meets its electoral goals ahead of the elections on the 1st of November. The committee found that its provincial structures were not all at the same level of preparation for the elections, with some, such as those in North West and the Western Cape, beset with problems. It reported that factionalism was deeply entrenched and was a factor in disputes of alleged manipulations and transgressions in the selection and election of candidates around the country. Most, if not all, disputes lodged with the provincial list committees are due to factional battles manifesting themselves at ward level and driven by factional leaders at senior levels of the organisation. ANC Electoral Committee report: during all the various stages of the candidate selection process, the Electoral Committee and its structures encountered fierce factional tendencies. Slate politics and factionalism have been entrenched to epidemic levels within the ANC, read the report presented to the NEC on Thursday. Motlanthe reported that the factional battles were fought in the name of the two main rival groups, which identified themselves as CR17 and RET forces. He said the manipulation of candidate lists appeared to favour whichever of these factions was in charge at provincial, regional and branch levels. Most, if not all, disputes lodged with the provincial list committees are due to factional battles manifesting themselves at ward level and driven by factional leaders at senior levels of the organisation, he wrote in the report. Motlanthe stated that members who seemed to believe they had closer proximity to the president often labelled others as RET forces to push their own personal agendas while entrenching divisions in the party. It is apparent that even senior leaders of the movement, including some NEC members, ministers, and deputy ministers, shamelessly and very openly pronounce their allegiance to a particular faction during their political and government work, he wrote. The report strongly condemned both factions and called on them to disband with immediate effect and focus on rebuilding and renewing the ANC. At provincial and regional levels, there are often sub-factions with different names which are formed on the eve of elective conferences. Motlanthe recommended that members who claimed allegiance to one faction and accused others of belonging to another faction face disciplinary action for sowing disunity and divisions within the party. At provincial and regional levels, there are often sub-factions with different names which are formed on the eve of elective conferences, and this conduct should be regarded as ill discipline, which must be harshly dealt with, he wrote. Role of money in the ANC. Motlanthe said the ANC's ability to achieve 50% and 25% representation of women and youth, respectively, on the ward and proportional representation lists in the current candidate selection process, had been severely hampered by factionalism, as senior male members were often the ringleaders of the various factions. He called on the party leadership, especially the president and all national officials, to intensify their efforts to quell factionalism by visibly and strongly condemning anybody using their names to push factional and personal agendas. The Electoral Committee also found glaring evidence of money being used to influence the outcomes of the candidate selection process in favour of certain candidates. There appear to be criminals, thugs and gangsters who are instigating protests, disputes and violence against the candidate selection by hiring unruly mobs who are bought food and alcohol to disrupt branch general meetings, community meetings and votes. These criminals, thugs and gangsters are using money to unduly influence the candidate selection process by busing mobs to protest at Lutule House and the provincial offices under the pretext of being disgruntled community members, the report stated. Regarding the selection and election of candidates, Motlanthe wrote that the committee had learnt of serious allegations of transgressions and deliberate non-compliance with the rules and guidelines, including the manipulation of candidate lists. However, he said all the matters were being investigated by the relevant ANC structures so that disciplinary and legal action may be taken against the transgressors and incorrigible leaders. Candidate registration. The report stated that, by September 13th, the ANC had registered for 374 candidates from the available 486 wards around the country, and had also registered 457 proportional representation candidates. In addition, the Electoral Committee had dealt with 531 disputes throughout the country, of which it had succeeded in resolving 757. There were still 774 disputes and 35 appeals to resolve. The report indicated that, while some provinces had performed dismally in the selection processes, 3 had performed well in dispute resolutions. The Eastern Cape, 100% disputes resolved, Limpopo 99%, and the Free State, 81%. Provinces which had performed below average included Mpumalanga, 56%, KwaZulu-Natal, 46%, and the Western Cape, just 6%. This is what the report said about the provinces. Gauteng, Deputy Secretary-General Jesse Duarte had to intervene following allegations of manipulation of the candidates list by the regional secretary and a member of the regional interview and vetting panels in Tshwane. The Electoral Committee discovered that many branches and communities had been overtaken by gangsters, criminals and thugs who had been disrupting the candidate selection process with impunity. These gangsters and criminal elements had displaced or even captured the ANC in some townships in Tshwane. Despite Duarte's intervention, the problems persisted and she had directed the NEC deployees to take charge and provide hands-on oversight on the candidate selection process in the Tshwane region. The committee recommended that the disruptive members be investigated and charged. Northwest, despite assurances by the Interim Provincial Committee, IPC, that more efforts would be made to monitor the candidate selection process and resolve disputes, the performance of both the IPC and provincial list committees in Northwest continued to regress and was marred mostly by allegations of serious impropriety and manipulation of lists levelled against IPC coordinator Kgalema Motlanthe and the interim regional coordinator. Chalk was accused of deliberately and grossly misrepresenting the Electoral Committee by issuing a letter purporting to communicate a resolution it had overseen without any mandate to do so. This fake, unauthorized letter had caused great confusion, as it falsely directed that there be no further resolution of disputes or rerunning of community meetings, contrary to the resolutions of an earlier meeting. Chalk was promptly reprimanded and forced to withdraw the letter. Limpopo, the Electoral Committee stated that it was disappointed by the performance of the Waterberg, Sekhukhune, and Norman Mashabane regions of Limpopo in registering candidates during the first window of the IEC registration, which closed on 23 August 2021. The committee discovered a video in which a regional interview and vetting panel member accused the regional secretary in Waterberg of manipulating the candidate lists, not complying with the candidate selection rules, and defying the verdicts issued by the Provincial List Committee. The busing of branch members from Waterberg to Lituli House was also alleged to have been instigated and sponsored by the regional secretary. The Electoral Committee recommended that the regional secretary be charged with misconduct, bringing the ANC into disrepute and sowing division within the party. Western Cape, the Electoral Committee found that the performance of both the Interim Leadership Committee and Provincial List Committee continued to regress, and that the provincial and regional coordinators had both been accused of impropriety and manipulation of lists. Duarte had to intervene and direct the NEC deployees to directly oversee the candidate selection process in this province. The Provincial List Committee had reported that the candidate lists from the Western Cape had been submitted by the IPC coordinator without the verification or approval of the committee's chairperson. Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal. The Electoral Committee found that both provinces were slow in registering candidates